President Biden says he'll confront China's abuses, but he says he's also willing to work with the regime. That's as a former Trump administration official warns of a negotiation trap. A pandemic control volunteer in China is fatally stabbed. He was attacked after trying to block a resident from leaving his locked-down neighborhood. $400 billion in foreign exchange reserves are missing from China's official data. We look into where that money ended up. And a failed rocket launch in China. Some say it could be related to a shortage of high-end microchips. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Biden outlined his plan for U.S. foreign policy during his first visit to the State Department on Thursday. Biden says he will take on the challenges China poses to U.S. national security. He says his administration will confront China's economic abuses and counter the Chinese regime's attack on human rights. But he says he is willing to work with China.
But we are ready to work with Beijing when it's in America's interest to do so. We will compete from a position of strength by building back better at home, working with our allies and partners, renewing our role in international institutions, and reclaiming our credibility and moral authority.
Biden's approach takes a different tone than former President Trump's floating the idea to decouple from China completely. A former White House official details a key tactic used by the Chinese Communist Party. It's partially responsible for the U.S. trade deficit. NTD's Don Ma has more.
One of the first things I would say is don't fall into a negotiation trap.
Former Deputy National Security Advisor Matthew Pottinger warns the new U.S. administration on Wednesday. Pottinger's former role was central to shaping then-President Trump's China policy. He reveals Beijing has been using this negotiation trap on the U.S. for 20 years.
Ambassador Bob Lighthizer showed a chart to the president and to the whole cabinet that showed all of these various dialogues that we've gotten trapped in over the course of 2 decades, and how the U.S. trade deficit and our hemorrhaging of intellectual property only continued to go up this escalator. It got worse and worse with each successive administration, each successive formal dialogue. So we should be talking on our...
Concerns are rising that China may use this negotiation trap on the current administration. Top Chinese foreign policy diplomat Yang Jiechi has indicated that Beijing has no intention of changing its ways. On Monday, he gave a speech that amounted to telling the Biden administration to play by the regime's rules. Another issue Pottinger brings up is Taiwan.
The people of Taiwan need to understand how significant and dangerous the situation's getting. And that's no fault of their leadership. That is all about Beijing. There are things that they're going to have to do to prepare for war in order to hopefully deter war.
Beijing has long claimed the self-ruled island as a renegade province, repeatedly threatening to reunify it by military force. Just days after Biden's inauguration, China sent dozens of military aircraft into Taiwan's airspace in an act of military aggression. The former advisor also talked about a fact sheet, one that seems to indicate that the CCP, or Chinese Communist Party, virus originated inside the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The fact sheet was issued by the State Department under the Trump administration.
There was the disclosure as well in that fact sheet of an outbreak of flu-like illness inside the Wuhan Institute of Virology in November, right when people think that this virus began to take off. It doesn't mean that was COVID, but it raises questions about assertions that Chinese officials have made about how no one faced any illness. So,
Pottinger says the fact sheet has been, quote, very carefully vetted by officials across health and human services departments, top intelligence leadership, and the White House. His remarks came during a virtual online panel. It was hosted by Florida International University's School of International and Public Affairs. Don Ma, NTD News.
A pandemic control volunteer in northeastern China was stabbed to death on Wednesday. He was attempting to block a resident from leaving his neighborhood. The volunteer worked as a neighborhood guard in the Hulan district of Harbin City, part of Heilongjiang province. The northeastern province is one of the heaviest hit regions in China's latest CCP virus resurgence. According to local police, he was stabbed multiple times after refusing to let a resident leave the neighborhood under lockdown rules. In Harbin, many neighborhoods are currently under strict lockdown orders. The Kanla neighborhood, where the volunteer was attacked, is among the most restrictive. It's been under lockdown for over 2 weeks and is considered a high-risk area for infection. Residents are required to stay inside their homes at all times. They're not even permitted to go outside for daily exercise. NTD's sister media, the Epoch Times, was able to reach several residents in the community for more details. One of them explained the man who attacked the volunteer wanted to go out to buy medicine, but was blocked at the community entrance. The man added that taking a brief walk through a courtyard shouldn't be a problem, as long as people are able to maintain a safe distance. The stabbing incident quickly became the most searched topic on Weibo, a Twitter-like social media platform. Many Chinese netizens left comments condemning the attack, but some also said they could understand the factors leading up to it. One of them writing, quote, "Local authorities are so strict on lockdown, and some volunteers are rude and have no sympathy," adding that they believe there will be more similar incidents. Confirmed virus infections are on the rise in China's northeastern Heilongjiang province. At present, 5 counties and villages have been designated as high-risk areas in Harbin, the province's capital city. A video posted online from the Hulan district in Harbin is drawing attention to some extreme virus prevention measures there. Not only are the entrances of many buildings sealed up, high fences have since been installed around them. It's the same district where a volunteer was stabbed to death by a resident after the volunteer tried to prevent him from leaving his neighborhood. Locals told us they're unsure how much longer they can cope with the situation. Hulan resident Mr. Yu explained his area is considered low risk, meaning authorities haven't reported any virus cases there. Despite that, it's still been locked down since mid-January. He says he has no idea what's really going on. He also detailed the rules for his neighborhood. Only one person from each household is allowed to go outside, only once every 2 days, and only for 2 hours at a time. He says he doesn't know when lockdown measures will be loosened. Another Harbin citizen, Ms. Zhou, also lives in a low-risk area. Despite no reported cases there, her neighborhood is also enduring strict lockdown orders, and that prices for essential goods like food have skyrocketed. She says people there are beginning to question if authorities are covering up cases. Yet another Harbin citizen, Mr. Yu, told us his company closed down after one of his colleagues visited a high-risk area. Mr. Yu is now working from home. He says 80% of private companies in the city have been forced to close. A rocket built by Chinese aerospace company iSpace reportedly failed shortly after liftoff this week. The Hyperbola 1 rocket lifted off from Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center in northwest China. Photos posted online show the rocket left an unusual exhaust trail in the sky. Chinese media didn't detail the reason behind the launch failure. It was China's 3rd rocket launch attempt this year. The first 2 were successful. Last year, at least 4 attempts failed, while 1 was delayed because of technical problems. Suspicions are rising that a U.S. technology ban hit China's space exploration industry hard. The policy blocks microchips made by or with U.S. technology from being exported to China. The high-end chip shortage could be causing trouble for China's space aspirations. Beijing hasn't commented on the assumption, but before the ban, launch failures were a rarity in the country. $400 billion in foreign exchange reserves are missing from the Chinese regime's official data. Why don't the numbers add up? NTD's Penny Zhou has more.
The Chinese regime is touting China's record trade surplus last year. That's despite the CCP virus pandemic's toll on global trade.
面对疫情变化和外部环境存在诸多不确定性，我国成为全球唯一实现货物贸易正增长的主要经济体。
The trade surplus means China exported more goods than it imported. This is supposed to give a massive $500 billion jump for the nation's foreign exchange reserves. But that didn't happen. Data from China's central bank shows foreign exchange reserves rose by only a little over $100 billion. This has raised discussions online. Where did the $400 billion go? China has the world's largest foreign exchange reserve, but it's still critical for Beijing to maintain a certain number in the reserves. That's because the country depends on the reserves to import essential goods, including grains, petrol, and semiconductor chips. The Chinese regime has a tight control over foreign exchanges. Exporters usually sell the foreign currencies they earned to China's commercial banks. Commercial banks then sell most of the money to the central bank. Foreign exchanges in the central bank, together with the small amounts kept by commercial banks, make up China's foreign exchange reserves. Chinese columnists have suggested some possible reasons why the numbers don't add up. This might be because some custom goods surplus is not yet remitted back to China, and some of the money may be soaked by commercial banks for overseas investments. But still, a huge amount is missing. According to China's balance of payments data, in the first 3 quarters of 2020, over $100 billion of the country's income were counted as errors and omissions. China's economic numbers are notoriously inaccurate. Even the regime itself has openly admitted to falsifying statistics. But it usually blames the mistakes on local authorities. A U.S. think tank previously estimated the Chinese regime overstated its GDP by about 2 percentage points every year. And a recent New York Federal Reserve report shows that China's official data are often unbelievably smooth over time compared to authentic data. Experts argue that when Western media and analysts cite the official data, the inaccuracies will have wide implications for investors and companies doing business in China. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
A new report is offering new information about China's efforts to suppress religion. It comes from US-based website Minghui.org, which tracks the persecution of the spiritual practice Falun Gong in China. The report says Chinese authorities sentenced nearly 200 Falun Gong practitioners to prison this January, all for refusing to give up their beliefs. Among those sentenced, the longest prison term received is over 10 years. The report also includes cases from late last year due to the difficulty of getting information out of China. Falun Gong is a spiritual practice based on the philosophy of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. It also includes a set of meditative exercises. The practice soared to popularity in the 90s after it was brought out in the public in 1992 in China. Over 70 million people were practicing it at the time, but the Chinese Communist regime launched a nationwide persecution against it in 1999. Since then, millions have been detained, and hundreds of thousands have endured torture. Those numbers are estimates from the Falun Dafa Information Center. Over 30 of the people sentenced in January are over senior citizens. One of them is 80 years old and was sentenced to over 8 years in prison. 2 more are over 60, each sentenced to 9 years. It's not clear if they'll serve the time outside prison on house arrest. Hong Kong is unveiling new curriculum guidelines for schools. Lesson plans are now set to teach students as young as 6 about colluding with foreign forces and subversion. It's part of what's being called national security curriculum. Beijing imposed a national security law in Hong Kong last year. It aimed to bring the global financial hub more in line with China's authoritarian system. Critics of the law say it encroaches on the city's democratic system and suppresses freedom. But the Hong Kong Education Bureau's guidelines show Beijing's plans go beyond quashing dissent. The guidelines say, quote, national security is of great importance. Teachers should not treat it as if it is a controversial issue for discussion as usual. Some Hong Kong citizens are voicing concerns.
I'm a little worried about the independent thinking abilities of primary school students in the future.
Another citizen praised the city's old education guidelines, saying they taught students how to think independently and from more than one perspective. China is reportedly forcing Hong Kongers with dual citizenships to choose sides. Canada's Global Affairs Department says a dual citizen is being forced to choose between Canada and Hong Kong. He's currently detained in Hong Kong. Declaring themselves Canadian may cost them their residency in Hong Kong, while siding with China means they'll no longer receive help from the Canadian government. Jerry Wong serves as director for the Alliance Canada-Hong Kong Advocacy Group. She told Canadian media that the Chinese Communist Party's decision to deny dual citizenship is a tactic used to crack down on dissent. The dual citizenship issue recently came into the spotlight in light of the UK announcing plans to welcome thousands of Hong Kongers fleeing Beijing's national security law. Canada is making it easier for Hong Kongers to gain permanent residency. The Canadian government says this is due to concerns over Hong Kong's new national security law. In a news release, the Canadian Minister of Migration announces that Hong Kongers with a Canadian college degree will be able to apply for work visas starting Monday. The visa will be valid for 3 years. Later this year, those with the visa will be able to apply for permanent residency. Hong Kongers who are facing persecution but don't have a Canadian college degree can apply for residency under Canada's refugee program. The immigration minister adds that Canada will continue to stand, quote, shoulder to shoulder with the people of Hong Kong in light of the national security law. 2 victims of forced confessions in China say they are relieved after a UK regulator revoked a broadcast license for a CCP-controlled broadcaster. NTD's Elle Rhodes has more.
Peter Humphrey celebrates the ruling by regulator Ofcom to ban Chinese state-owned broadcaster CGTN.
Seeing the license revoked today is a moment of triumph, not only for me, but also for all the other victims of this type of abuse, including many Chinese people.
CGTN broadcast a forced confession with Humphrey that was filmed during his 2-year imprisonment in China. Humphrey says that he was drugged, tied to a chair and put in a cage when a police officer interrogated him, adding that CGTN, which broadcasts in English, completely misrepresented the situation in its report. Humphrey says his son, who was 18 at the time, was traumatized by what he saw.
They want to influence the global narrative about China and what's happening in China and so forth through the twists that they put on their coverage. They do it through sheer distortion and lies.
Ofcom argued that since CGTN is fully controlled by the CCP, it cannot broadcast here, since UK broadcasting law doesn't allow political entities to hold licenses. CGTN, whose European headquarters are in London, called Ofcom's ruling manipulated by extreme right-wing organisations and anti-China forces.
Ofcom's decision on revoking the license of CGTN is historically significant. It is clear that the mouthpiece of CCP totalitarian regime will no longer have a foothold in the UK.
Cheng was abducted in 2019 to extract information about the Hong Kong protests. He said he was tortured and forced to confess to have solicited prostitution. Cheng says watching his forced confession on CGTN caused him great distress. Humphrey expects Ofcom to hand out more penalties to CGTN over his and Cheng's complaints. Elle Rhodes, NTD News.
The BBC is coming under renewed fire from Chinese officials. That's after Britain's media regulator revoked Chinese state media CGTN's broadcast license. The Chinese regime accused the British broadcasting company of pushing what it called fake news in its coverage of the pandemic. That's including reports outlining Beijing's cover-up, violent incidents that happened because of extreme prevention measures, and the origins of the virus. Beijing says the BBC politicized the pandemic and demanded an apology. The BBC maintains its reporting is fair and unbiased. Reports from British newspaper The Telegraph say 3 Chinese spies who falsely posed as journalists have been expelled from Britain. That's during the past year. A senior UK government source told the paper the spies each claimed to work for 3 different Chinese media agencies. All of them set foot in the UK within the past 12 months. According to The Telegraph, their true identities were uncovered by MI5, the UK's counterintelligence agency. They've since been forced to return to China. According to UK-based newspaper Times, Manchester University cancels an agreement with a Chinese technology company. The report says China Electronics Technology Corporations, or CETC, supplies technology to the Public Security Bureau in Chinese Xinjiang region. Beijing uses the technology in identifying Uyghur Muslims for surveillance and persecution. Manchester University claims that it was unaware of CETC's involvement. Britons are drinking more wines from Australia during the pandemic and before Brexit. The UK is now Australia's biggest export market in terms of volume. According to a report by the trade body Wine Australia, in the year to December 2020, the UK imported 266 million litres of Australian wine, up 19%, making it the #1 destination in the world. The study says the strong growth started at the advent of the pandemic due to increased demand and was boosted in the months leading up to Brexit. The surge of UK demand helps Australia offset a slump in sales to China after the country imposed heavy tariffs on Australian wine last November. Taiwan is accusing the CCP of being a bully. Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen posted a statement on Facebook this Friday. In it, she condemns Beijing for pressuring Guyana into canceling a diplomatic deal with Taiwan. It all happened in just one day. This Thursday, Guyana says it would cancel an agreement that allows Taiwan to open a de facto embassy there. It adds that the Guyana government has not established any diplomatic ties with Taiwan. After Taiwan announced the deal with Guyana, the CCP asked Guyana to, quote, correct its mistake. Taiwan believes the agreement would deepen ties.
We believe
that setting up an office in Guyana will help promote the deepening of Taiwan's relations in South America and the expansion of substantive relations in relevant countries in the Caribbean region.
Guyana is a country in South America, and it's part of the Caribbean region. In recent years, Guyana has been developing its offshore oil reserves. The CCP claims Taiwan to be part of its own territory. It forbids countries from having diplomatic ties with both the communist regime and Taiwan. The CCP has been isolating Taiwan from the international community for years. Right now, Taiwan only has diplomatic relations with 14 countries. 4 of them are in the Caribbean region. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Hi, we're happy to announce that you can also catch us on cable TV now. Millions of households already choose us as one of their trusted news sources, and you can too. You can watch us in Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York, and many other cities as well. And if your system doesn't carry NTD yet, you can just give them a quick call and request NTD on your cable provider. Thank you for watching. See you next time.